You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us.
Hi, I'm Annie, as always coming to you from Boston, Mass.
And I'm Johanna from Vienna, Austria. Welcome back to another episode of your, hopefully, favorite international murder and mystery podcast. Annie and I never met in real life.
Yet.
Yes, we hope to change that in 2020. And we started this podcast around 10 months ago, I think. And we are so grateful for all your support and all your kind messages and everything. We're just grateful.
We really are. We're so grateful. We also wanted to send a shout out to our listener in Norway. Are you our only listener in Norway? It's cool. But they go by the name Moose and Me, which made me laugh because my sister is called Moose and has been since she was a teeny tiny preemie baby. And so that made me laugh. But yeah, we really appreciated that review. So thank you so much. I'm really hoping someday we can go to Norway. It's very high on my list. I want to cruise the fjords.
Yes, very high on my bucket list too.
Yeah.
And I'm so close. Never been there.
We need to go. We need to win the lottery. I should buy a ticket. All right. Last week, we talked a little bit about the history of the Habsburg dynasty and the death of Crown Prince Rudolf and his mistress, Mary Vechida. If you haven't listened to that one yet, we definitely recommend that you go back and listen to that one first before you continue with this episode, just so that you know what we're going to be talking about today. Also, a warning, in addition to all the death, we're going to also be touching on eating disorders again in this episode. But just to refresh our memories, Johanna, would you give us just a quick recap?
My pleasure. So, in part 1, we examined the first part of Franz Joseph I's life, how he became emperor at age 18, married his 16-year-old cousin Elisabeth. They had 4 children. The first one didn't survive infancy, and their only son and heir to the throne, Crown Prince Rudolf, shot his mistress in the head before dying by suicide. We closed last week's episode with the funeral of Rudolf and Mary and the theft of Mary's body in 1991. And today we will be talking about what happened after this tragedy, and we will cover both the assassinations of Empress Elisabeth I and the Archduke Franz Ferdinand.
Okay, let's get into it. All right, so Rudolf is buried in the... Oh, man. All right. Kapuziner?
Almost Kapuziner.
Kapuziner. I was going to say Ziner or Ziner. So Rudolf is buried in the Kapuziner crypt, and Mary is buried in the Heiligenkreuz. Rudolf's widow, Princess Stephanie, is blamed for Rudolf's suicide. After her son's death, Empress Elisabeth gave away most of her jewelry and almost exclusively wore black for the rest of her life, just like Queen Victoria did after the death of her husband. The only exception in Elizabeth's wardrobe was the so-called clear-colored dress. And it was not clear. It was sort of a creamy white or off-white, I'd say, and it was worn by her for very, very special and rare occasions, like the Emperor's birthday. So, of course, Rudolf's suicide was a drastic, life-altering event in Elizabeth's life. We mentioned it in the first part already that she, just like her son, had a very melancholy and often somewhat gloomy character. And this only worsened after 1889. She withdrew more and more from the public eye, and she continued to write poems which grew even darker. And it just showed a really disturbing, severe death wish. She also continued to travel through Europe, but grew more and more restless. During her travels, she forced her entourage to undertake exhausting slogs. She way ahead of them, while her ladies-in-waiting could barely keep up. I think it was in Greece where her fast way of hiking got her the admiring nickname, the Locomotive. And of course, this was probably just another symptom of her anorexia and her body dysmorphia issues, which we've talked about a bit in the first part. But she continued to starve herself. She grew even thinner, and I read that her body showed signs of nutritional edema, which is retention of water in body tissue due to malnutrition. Another thing that troubled her was hair loss. And I'm not actually sure if we're talking about just the normal amount of hair that we all shed regularly, or if it was a more serious problem caused by malnutrition. But whatever the reasons, it definitely compounded her anxiety about her appearance. And so whenever her maid brushed her hair, Elizabeth would demand that she be shown the comb afterwards. And if there were too many hairs in that comb, then she would get angry. The maid eventually learned to trick her by having a second comb hidden in her apron, which she would quickly exchange before handing it over to the Empress. She sounds super fun to work for. To top everything off, the Empress, who was once praised as the most beautiful woman in Europe, could not accept the fact that she too was aging. She tried eagerly to stop her face from showing wrinkles, sleeping, for example, with raw veal that she would put on her face and cover with a leather mask. I mean, can you even imagine the smell? It's like something out of Silence of the Lambs.
I honestly think I prefer my Korean skincare routine, thank you.
I would take one of those snail masks over that.
Yeah, of course, yeah. I don't even want to imagine sleeping with a veal schnitzel on my face. Fun fact! Did you know that a Wiener Schnitzel is only allowed to be called Wiener Schnitzel if it is veal? If you make a schnitzel from pork or chicken, it must be called Schnitzel nach Wiener Art, so Viennese-style Schnitzel. You are very welcome.
Okay, can I just real quick ask you an embarrassing question?
Always?
Okay. It's not really a question. It's just something I've only just come to realize. Wiener, it means Vienna, doesn't it? I honest to God didn't start to put that together until just recently.
Yeah, not really. So Wien is the German name of Vienna and Wiener is the adjective and it means Viennese.
Wow, okay. So I'm certain I must have known this before and just forgotten it, but I feel like I really didn't know that. Like, I just thought Wiener Schnitzel was, I don't know what I thought, but I didn't know it meant Viennese Schnitzel. I'm certain I didn't know that. So look at that. You learn something new every day. All right. So Elisabeth not only used schnitzel on her face, which I think we can all agree is categorically insane, she also used the so-called cold cream, which was actually invented by the Greeks in the 2nd century. It contained water, later glycerin, beeswax, and olive oil. But Elisabeth's version was, of course, far more fancy and also contained amber, white wax, almond and sesame oil, and rose water. Oh, and I almost forgot. Elisabeth was also way ahead of her time. She added zinc to her cold cream and created a sunblock with an SPF of 25. I mean, she didn't know yet that sun damage is one of the biggest factors in aging your skin, but having pale skin was what was considered beautiful at that time, and as a woman who traveled around and spent so much time on ships and in hot climates, she definitely needed something to protect herself from tanning. But guess what? Aging doesn't stop for anyone, not even the Empress of Austria, the most beautiful woman in Europe. And Elisabeth really had a hard time dealing with it. Even at a young age, she disliked it when people looked at her, but now that she was older, she would often hide her face behind her fan or her parasol. There's a famous photo that shows her on a horse, hiding completely behind her big, dark fan. Of course, as always, we'll post pictures and links to our sources in our Facebook group and some photos on our Instagram.
Elisabeth loved everything Greek. She studied classical and modern Greek, identified with their mythology, and felt a special connection to Achilles. We mentioned last week that she traveled to Corfu regularly, and in 1889, after her son's suicide, Franz Joseph was finally able to buy an estate for his wife there, and construction of her mansion on Corfu, the Achilleion, started in 1890. I've actually been there. Remember in our episode 21, the International Tales?
Yes.
I told you how we drove to Greece in 1989. Just realized that's exactly 100 years after Rudolf's death.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, we did spend our 2-week vacation on Corfu, and I begged my parents to take me to the Achilleion because as a kid I was obsessed with all things about Elisabeth. It's a beautiful place, and if any one of you ever gets to Corfu, you should go and visit the mansion. I can highly recommend.
Yeah, I remember that. That was one of my favorite episodes, and we need to plan another one. We've still got a lot of countries to cover, but that definitely sounds like something I'd want to see.
So, construction started in 1890, and it took 2 years. She stayed there several times, once even with her daughters Gisela and Marie Valerie. But in all fairness, after the Achilleion was completed, her love for Greece kind of cooled off. Maybe she was the kind of person who grew bored of things after a while. I don't know. I have to say one positive thing that happened in those years. It seems as if her relationship to her husband blossomed again a little bit after her son's death. Maybe not in a romantic way, but it grew into kind of a strong, intimate friendship as letters between the two show. In 1893, they even traveled to Switzerland together and spent some harmonic days there. In 1897, another tragedy. Elisabeth's younger sister Sophie died during a charity event, the Bazaar de la Charité in Paris, when a broken cinematograph caught fire and burned a whole wooden building down. Sophie, who had refused to leave and save herself before all of her entourage was safe, could not be found at first. Only hours later, her severely burned body was recovered from the ruins.
That's just heartbreaking.
Remember when we told you that Elisabeth loved horse riding? Well, unfortunately, she started to suffer from rheumatism and had problems with her ischiatic nerve and therefore had to give up this hobby too. In order to treat her symptoms, doctors prescribed her cocaine and opioids. And the little syringe she used for cocaine injections on her journeys was in a museum in Munich until 2006. I don't know where it is now. And of course, she also visited health spas and sanatoriums to help her with her problems. In 1898, the 60-year-old empress traveled to several climatic health resorts like Bad Kissingen in Bavaria or Caux in Switzerland to seek treatment. And when traveling, she would often use the pseudonym Countess of Hohenems. But she used this name so often that it was kind of an open secret already, which is maybe not the best thing.
Yeah.
On 9th of September, Elisabeth and her lady-in-waiting Irma Staray took the ferry to Geneva, where they did spend the night in the luxurious Hotel Beau Rivage directly on the shores of Lake Geneva. She did not have any man to protect her with her, nor did she take any precautions, just her pseudonym. And in the evening, Elisabeth was invited as guest of the Rothschild family. She had dinner, I assume, at their estate, the Chateau de Brogny. Any that's hardcore house porn, by the way.
Oh, yeah. The Rothschilds. That's how we would say it here. I definitely want to go to there.
Okay, so Elisabeth is having dinner, she's even eating normally, they are having a great time, and after dinner the Baroness Rothschild shows off her world-famous orchids when Elisabeth turns to her lady-in-waiting saying, quote, "I wish my soul could fly to heaven through a tiny hole in my heart," end quote.
Foreshadowing.
Mm-hmm. They returned to the Hotel Beau Rivage, where Elisabeth and Irma spent the night, and when she awoke the next morning, 10th of September 1898, the Empress had no idea that her fate was sealed by the hand of an Italian anarchist.
His name was Luigi Lucchini, and he was born on April 22nd, 1873 in Paris as the son of a single mother who had come from Italy to the French city to work. He did spend his early childhood in an orphanage. Later on, he was sent to a foster family in Parma, Italy, but unfortunately that family was only interested in the foster money, and on top of the money that they received for fostering him, they also sent him to work after school from an early age. First as the assistant to a gardener, later as the servant of a priest. Finally, at the wizened age of 10, he quit school completely and worked for a mason and then for the railway company. At 10. Kids today, slackers. Of course, he could never keep any of this money. He had to hand everything over to his foster family. This is very Dickensian. But I get it. Times were tough for everyone back then. At 16, Luigi left the family, never to return again, which I think we can all understand. And he migrated to Switzerland to find work and a better life, because probably literally anything would be better than his life up to that point, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're not unsympathetic. Well, that's the problem, right? People stop being so sympathetic to the monsters. Well, sometimes they're monsters for a reason.
Look, it was different times. People didn't even have beds.
Exactly.
People slept in turns.
Yeah.
In beds.
Yeah.
All of Europe was not good times back then.
It was bad times. So, yeah. He did find a job. First, he built roads in Tessin. That's the Italian-speaking part of Switzerland. What are the languages that are spoken in Switzerland? Italian?
French and German. Mm-hmm.
That's a lot. That's pretty impressive. Does everyone speak all three?
Well, the German part is around Zurich, and then Geneva is the French part, and Tessin is the Italian part.
Okay.
But I don't think everybody speaks all three. I think it depends on... I think most people do speak Schweizerdeutsch, which is a form of German.
Yes, I have a friend who is Swiss German. Yeah, okay. So it's like Canada, where certain parts they'll only speak French to you, and yeah, okay. All right. So he first did build roads in Tessin, and then he made his way to Lake Geneva. He later stated that he walked most of the way without shoes, only rags wrapped around his aching feet. That was around 260 kilometers or 162 miles, with rags on your feet. He worked for 10 months at Lake Geneva, again building roads, and then he left Switzerland heading toward Budapest. On his way there, he stopped for 2 days in Vienna. In Budapest, he stayed for 2 weeks, but was unable to find any work. With no money and no way to earn any money, desperately, he turned to the Italian embassy for help. They handed him a train ticket to Fiume, which is in Croatia, and nowadays is called Rijeka. From there, once more, he walked via Trieste, which back then was in Austria-Hungary, but nowadays it's in Italy. And then finally, he had made it back to Italy. That is a arduous journey.
A lot of walking.
Yep.
So basically he was walking around half of Europe trying to find
work.
A job.
Yeah, unbelievable. In 1894, he joined the military, and even though he was quite an insubordinate soldier, it might have been the happiest time in his life because he had clean clothes, a place to sleep, and regular meals. His service ended in December 1897. He found employment as a servant at a nobleman's house in Sicily. Luigi stayed there for only 3.5 months, and once more he made his way to Switzerland. He took a boat from Sicily to Genoa, and then he walked again via Monte Carlo to Turin and then on to Switzerland. And so that is another, 710 kilometers or 440 miles. Johanna, this guy walks more than you do.
And I definitely have better shoes than him.
Yeah.
One thing you should know listening right now, this guy was not walking, that wasn't a nice walk in the park. That guy literally is crossing the Alps at least 2 times, I think.
I can't. So he's back at Lake Geneva working on construction sites, and I think by now we can all understand that he has had a very difficult and unfortunate life, and this made him open to very radical ideas like anarchism.
I guess it sounded good to him in theory.
So many things do, though, don't they?
Yeah.
So, in May of 1898, there was a socialist riot in Milan against rising food prices, the so-called Bhava Bukhari's massacre after General Fiorenzo Bhava Bukhari's. These riots ended in the death of 80 protesters, 2 soldiers, and left more than 450 people wounded. These events also led to a constitutional crisis in Italy. Luigi Lucchini was livid when he heard the news of these bloody riots and that so many people had just lost their lives only because they protested for decent living conditions, and he swore revenge. Of course, he would have loved to assassinate King Umberto I or any other member of the Italian royalty. The only problem was he didn't have the money to travel to Italy. So he decided to murder the Prince Orléans, or as we would say, especially if you're from Cape Cod, Orleans, who was supposed to visit Geneva. But the prince canceled his plans last minute. What to do? But then he saw the headlines. Oh, the Empress Elisabeth I of Austria-Hungary had just arrived in Geneva. The media, of course, already knew her trick of using Countess of Hohenems as a cover.
So on the morning of 10th of September, Luigi Lucchini placed himself in front of the Hotel Beau Rivage and patiently waited. And finally, at 1:35 p.m., Elisabeth and Irma left the hotel, heading towards the wharf to go on board the ship that would take them back to Caux on the other side of the shore. The distance from the hotel to the wharf was 220 meters, so that's 0.1 miles.
That's close.
Luigi followed the 2 women for 200 meters. They had almost reached the waiting ferry when he attacked. Luigi walked towards them and the Empress felt how she was pushed down. She assumed the young man had simply tried to steal her watch. Luigi ran off. Passerbys helped the Empress to get back up and she thanked them, stating that everything was fine. The 2 women quickly boarded the ferry when all of a sudden Elisabeth's face turned pale and she said, quote, "What did happen to me?" end quote. And she fainted. And she never regained consciousness. It was only then, after Irma Staray opened her Empress's tight-laced corset to help her breathing, that they spotted a tiny bloodstain right where her heart was. Luigi Lucchini had stabbed an iron file into Elisabeth's chest, puncturing her heart. And it is actually speculated that the only tiny wound, the shock and actually the corset, made it possible that the deadly wounded Empress could still walk on board.
Yeah.
Elisabeth was returned immediately to the Hotel Beau Rivage, where she died at 2:40 p.m. Irma did send a telegraph to Vienna immediately informing Franz Josef of his wife's death, and his reaction was, quote, "I'm spared nothing in this world," end quote.
Is the hotel still there?
Yeah, it's still there. It's the oldest hotel in Geneva.
We need to go there.
So Franz Josef, he was heartbroken. He never fully recovered from his loss, and he kept telling his relatives, quote, "You will never know how much I love this woman," end quote. An autopsy was ordered. The examiners found that the stab wound was 8.5 centimeters deep, so that's 3.3 inch, and that the weapon had left a small triangular hole in the chest that had caused no more than probably 3 or 4 blood drops coming out. Her 4th rib was broken and the weapon had penetrated the upper part of the lung. That's the part that covers the heart. The left chamber of her heart was pierced through. Elisabeth wanted to be buried near the ocean, preferably in Corfu, but her last wish was not granted. She rests, like most other Habsburger, and just like her son, in the Kapuziner crypt, including her heart.
Luigi ran, but he didn't get far. He was caught in the Rue des Alpes and handed over to the police. There's a photo of his arrest where he smiles at the camera, absolutely happy with what he's just done. He was sentenced to life in prison. The trial lasted only 1 day. Luigi Lucchini stated, "I don't regret anything." He actually asked to be tried in Italy so that he could receive the death penalty because he wanted to die a martyr. He didn't know that he had killed one of the few aristocrats who disliked the monarchy almost as much as he did. But even if he would have known, he probably wouldn't have cared. On the 19th of October, 1910, Luigi Lucchini hung himself with his belt in his darkened prison cell. After his death, his head was then separated from his body and his brain examined, but no abnormalities could be found. Until 1985, the head was kept in a formaldehyde-filled jar in Geneva. Only then it was brought to Vienna, where it was kept in the Pathological Museum in the so-called Narrenturm, or the Fool's Tower, or Madhouse Tower. In the year 2000, the head was finally put to rest at the Viennese Central Cemetery. The murder weapon can be seen to this day in the CC Museum of the Viennese Hofburg. All right, so it's time for the last act of this 2-part episode. We are now going to talk about the Archduke Franz Ferdinand.
Okay, so now we have to jump back a little bit again to the suicide of Crown Prince Rudolf. After his death in 1889, the Habsburg throne needed a new heir. Franz Josef had 2 younger brothers, Archduke Maximilian Ferdinand, the later Emperor Maximilian I of Mexico, and Karl Ludwig, the youngest of the 3, so Archduke Karl Ludwig, that's his title. Wait a minute, you might say, how did the Austrian Maximilian become Emperor of Mexico? Well, without getting into too much detail, I'm just gonna say this. Maximilian, he was placed there by the French Emperor Napoleon III against the wishes of Franz Josef and against the wishes of the Mexican people, because Mexican people wanted to keep their president Benito Juarez.
Yeah.
Maximilian had actually told Napoleon III that he would only go to Mexico if the Mexicans really wanted him there as an emperor. They didn't want that.
No.
So a Mexican delegation brought Maximilian a fake referendum stating that the Mexican people were happy to have him. Which is so weird.
It's just
horrible.
Yeah.
Maximilian he wasn't all that bad. He dreamed of installing a modern and liberal nation there. To go to Mexico as an emperor, he had to give up his right to the Austrian throne when he accepted the Mexican one, of course. After 3 years, his dream came to an end when he was overthrown, sentenced to death by Juarez, and executed. So that's that. Just a quick.
Yeah, just a real quick bummer for you. Yeah.
But because Maximilian gave up his right to the Habsburg throne, Karl Ludwig became the next in line after Rudolf's suicide. Well, Karl Ludwig died at the age of 63 in 1896, and his death is also very interesting. So, he traveled to Cairo to visit his oldest son, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was there to cure tuberculosis. In this time, Karl Ludwig also traveled to Palestine, where he drank the water from the River Jordan. Infected water from the River Jordan. And his travel companions had even warned him to not drink the water of the River Jordan. But he didn't listen, thinking that water from the Holy River could never harm him. Well, typhoid killed him off real good. He died only 1 month after his return to Vienna.
Yeah, we talk a lot about travel, and I think that we sometimes do a lot of little helpful travel tips, things to do, places to see. Don't drink the water. If they tell you not to drink the water, don't drink it. All right.
I have to imagine them standing all there saying no,
don't drink that water.
Don't do it. And he's just nothing can happen to me. Yeah. It's the holy water of the River Jordan.
Yeah.
Cluck, cluck, cluck.
If they say don't drink the water, just don't drink it.
That's solid advice.
If we can give you just one piece of advice that you'd keep with you forever, it's if they tell you don't drink the water, don't drink the water. All right. So his death made his eldest son, Franz Ferdinand, the next in line for the throne. Thank God he could actually cure his tuberculosis. Franz Ferdinand was born on the 18th of December, 1863, so by the time he became heir, he was 33 years old. And not only the future emperor of Austria-Hungary, but also one of the wealthiest men in the country, thanks to an inheritance from his cousin, the Duke of Modena. Before his father's death, he had traveled a lot. He even circumnavigated the world from 1892 to 1893. On this journey, he visited India, Australia, the Solomon Islands, Hong Kong, Japan, Vancouver, crossed the United States, and then returned to Europe. As we mentioned already in last week's episode, Franz Josef tried to marry Rudolf's widow, the Princess Stephanie, to Franz Ferdinand, but I think both Franz Ferdinand and Stephanie were not very excited about this idea, and Franz Ferdinand had other plans. In 1894, he met Countess Sophie Chotek, the lady-in-waiting of Archduchess Isabella. They fell in love, but managed to keep their relationship secret for a while. Franz Ferdinand visited the home of Archduchess Isabella often, and she assumed that he had fallen in love with her oldest daughter, Marie Christine. Isabella discovered how unbelievably mistaken she was when she found Franz Ferdinand's locket at the tennis court. She assumed it contained her daughter's portrait, but when Isabella opened the locket, she found a picture of her own lady-in-waiting, Sophie Chotek. It was a huge scandal. After the relationship was discovered, Franz Josef was not amused. Even though Sophie was the offspring of old Bohemian nobility, she was nowhere near the social status of the future emperor. But Franz Ferdinand was in love and insisted on marrying Sophie. After a while, Franz Josef agreed, but only under the premise that the marriage was morganatic. That means a marriage between people from two different social ranks. It prevents the passage of titles and privileges, and that their future children would not have succession rights.
So Franz Ferdinand and Sophie got married on 1st of July 1900 in Bohemia, and almost nobody of the imperial family attended the wedding. By the way, did you know that a morganatic marriage also meant that Sophie could never attend official events next to her husband? That means she couldn't ride with him in the royal carriage, she couldn't sit with him in the imperial theater box.
Yeah, honestly, it's such bullshit. I can't remember now, it was either on Victoria or The Crown. I think The Crown, where it touched a bit on this sort of relationship, and it's just so unnecessary. Anyhow.
Sophie later received the title of the Duchess of Hohenberg, which made her situation a little bit better as it raised her rank considerably, but she still had to stand far away from her husband at all official events. The couple had 4 children, a daughter, 2 sons, and unfortunately a stillborn son. Guess what? It seems their marriage was actually a happy one. Good for them. Really?
Really?
It was not normal in the Habsburg family to have a happy marriage, apparently.
No.
Franz Ferdinand's politics were coined by his very conservative Catholicism, his dynastic centralism, and his desire to grant the different ethnicities in the empire more autonomy. Especially, he was very liberal towards the Czech, the Croatians, and the Bosnians. At the time, Austria-Hungary was a multicultural empire, so that meant parts of Poland, parts of Romania, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Slovenia, Croatia, parts of Italy, Bosnia, Serbia. I'm sure I'm forgetting a lot of places. I'm sorry. They were all parts of Austria-Hungary. It was huge. He was not as generous toward Hungarians, and he was especially careful towards the Serbian nationalists. He was actually planning to reform the dualistic system of Austria-Hungary and exchange it for a trialistic system in which Croatia, Bosnia, and Dalmatia were to form another part of the empire now named South Slavia, so that they had like the same position as Hungary. Of course, that was absolutely not in the interest of Serbia, who wanted to unite the Slavic countries to a kingdom under Serbian governance. I think you can all see there's quite a little bit of trouble creeping up.
Yeah, there's a lot of political maneuvering happening.
Yeah, well, we try to keep it as simple as possible to, get the point across what's going on.
Yeah, there's a lot of now independent countries under this one empire, and they're all fighting for their own individual rights.
Yeah, they all wanted independence.
Absolutely.
Yeah. These were all nationalist movements to get independence, yes. Yeah. So in July of 1914, Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie traveled to Bosnia-Herzegovina to attend some military exercises there. And they also planned an official visit to the capital, Sarajevo. And that was planned for 28th of July. The Mlada Bosna, which translates to Young Bosnia, that was a revolutionary movement, was planning an assassination together with the Serbian underground organization called the Black Hand. I'm not completely sure why nobody felt at any point that the Archduke might have been in danger, but the security measures for the Sarajevo visit were almost non-existent. For example, the exact route and timetable had been printed weeks earlier in the newspaper because they wanted to have a huge cheering crowd there next to the street. But come on, I mean, seriously, you have this whole tension in the whole empire and...
Yeah. Maybe just take a tiniest of precautions.
Yeah, well, there were some vague warnings and rumors of a planned assassination.
Yeah.
And how do you say that? Like,
I know.
By the way...
This might happen.
Pew, pew.
Yeah, it's pew pew.
It was nothing that was taken too seriously anyway.
Yeah.
So Ferdinand with his wife Sophie next to him were in a convoy of 6 cars that made their way towards the city hall in Sarajevo. And now you all go, aha, how is it possible? I thought Franz Ferdinand and Sophie could not be next to each other on official events. Yes, you have a point. You are very, very right. But there was a loophole. Whenever Franz Ferdinand was traveling as a military official, he could, according to protocol, appear with his wife by his side. And the couple had used this loophole several times already. So the convoy moves towards the city hall in Sarajevo, following the river. A 7th car, a police car, driving ahead of them. In the first car is the mayor of Sarajevo. In the second car, a beautiful, really beautiful double phaeton, which means 4 seats, Franz Ferdinand and his wife. And in the other cars behind them, the rest of the entourage. Along the way, several assassins of the Mlada Bosna and the Black Hand are waiting for them. The convoy passes the first assassin. He was supposed to throw a bomb, but failed, as he couldn't locate which car was the one that carried the Archduke. The convoy moves towards the second assassin. He asked a passing police officer which is the car of Franz Ferdinand, and, to protect and to serve, he points out the second car. So the assassin throws a bomb, the driver sees the dark object flying their way and accelerates the car. The Archduke raises his arm to protect his wife and the bomb hits his arm, rolls back over the open top, falls off the car and explodes in front of the third car. Passengers of the third car, as well as some spectators, were lightly injured.
It's amazing, isn't it? But wait, it gets... Okay. So this assassin who had thrown the bomb that had been diverted by the Archduke's arm, which, that's amazing.
Yeah.
He realizes that he has failed in his attempt, and so he swallows some cyanide and jumped into the river. Problem is, the cyanide was old. Don't use old cyanide. And so it didn't kill him, it just made him very sick. So now he's vomiting in a river, which... I think we can all agree, is not a good time. He was pulled out of the river and arrested, and that is some seriously Rasputin shit right there. Okay, now you would think that at this point they'd be like, hey, why don't we go ahead and stop this whole thing just to get this royal couple out of this very dangerous situation? But when Franz Ferdinand hears that the passengers in the third car were only a little bit injured, he's like, it's fine. And so he orders them to just continue on with the drive. Yeah. They pass by yet another assassin, but this guy, he just let them pass. He didn't do anything, and he later stated that he felt sorry for the Duchess. So finally they arrive at City Hall, where Franz Ferdinand tells the mayor, quote, "Mr. Mayor, we are coming to Sarajevo to visit you and have bombs thrown at us. That's outrageous," end quote.
I think that's another one of those moments in history where they were actually yelling, "Are you fucking kidding me?" Just like when Lincoln was shot, and it translates to, "That's outrageous."
Yeah, probably. So, now again, you would think that now that they're all safe in City Hall, they just stop this whole thing. But nope. They continue on. Now, Franz Ferdinand actually orders the driver to change the route. But for whatever reason, the driver, he either ignores it or he forgets about it until later, or whatever reason, he doesn't change the route. He just continues on the planned route until the convoy crosses the river, driving over the Latin Bridge. Once they get on that bridge, the driver now realizes he's made a mistake, and so he tries to put the car in reverse. The car is now standing still for just a few seconds, and it's right in front of, and quite to the surprise, of yet another assassin. So many assassins. This one is 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip. After he saw the failed bomb attack, Gavrilo had left his position, contemplating suicide, but he decided to go for a coffee first. So he's in there, standing at a table inside this little cafe when he sees the car stopped right outside. And Gavrilo Princip steps outside, pulls his 9mm, and he shoots the Archduke and his wife from a very close distance twice. One shot hits Sophie in her lower abdomen, which causes her to bleed to death in the car. Franz Ferdinand, seeing his wife shot, yells out, "Sophie, Sophie, don't die," and he gets shot in the neck immediately. Count Harrach, who was part of the entourage and the first to try and help the couple, recounts the scene. He says, quote, "As the car quickly reversed, a thin stream of blood spurted from His Highness's mouth onto my right cheek. As I was pulling out my handkerchief to wipe the blood away from his mouth, the Duchess cried out to him, 'In heaven's name, what has happened to you?' At that, she slid off the seat and lay on the floor of the car with her face between his knees. I had no idea that she too was hit and thought she had simply fainted with fright. Then I heard His Imperial Highness say, 'Sophie, Sophie, don't die, stay alive for the children.' At that, I seized the Archduke by the collar of his uniform to stop his head from drooping forward and asked if he was in great pain. He answered me quite distinctly, 'It's nothing.' His face began to twist somewhat, but he went on repeating 6 or 7 times, ever more faintly as he gradually lost consciousness, 'It's nothing.' Then, after a short pause, there was a violent choking sound caused by the bleeding. It stopped as we reached the Konak." End quote. Gavrilo, the successful assassin, he takes his potassium cyanide, but he too starts to vomit because it's old cyanide. So he tries to shoot himself with his gun, but the bystanders wrestle the gun out of his hands and he is arrested. Because he's only 19 years old, he can't be sentenced to death, but he is sentenced to 20 years forced labor. He was kept isolated in a tiny, humid cell, chained to the wall most of the time. He lost one arm due to the horrible prison conditions, and he tried and failed to die by suicide several times. He finally died on April 28, 1918, from tuberculosis.
Interestingly enough, the assassination of the Archduke and his wife didn't really cause a lot of grief in the empire. Franz Joseph I himself allegedly said, "For me, it's really a relief from a great worry." The morganatic marriage and the possible succession of the throne by Franz Ferdinand's children seem to have been a constant worry for the aging emperor. He did put way more trust in the next in line, that was his grandnephew Archduke Karl. Nevertheless, the assassination of Sarajevo gave an occasion to war parties to urge the emperor to declare war on Serbia, which he did on 28th of July 1914. This day marks the beginning of World War I, which would change the face of Europe forever, ultimately dissolving the Habsburg Empire. The war lasted 4 years and it did cost 17 million lives. Franz Josef did not live to see the war end. He died on 24th of November 1916 at the age of 86 from lung infection. That day he had still been working at his desk from the early morning hours, just like every other day. He had ruled the empire for 69 years, that's 4 years longer than Queen Victoria. For his funeral, the dying Habsburg Empire showed itself one last time in all its dark glory. The streets were filled with people, but complete silence fell over the city. There exist some videos, and of course we will post the links in our Facebook group. And a couple of more things before we end. The car from the Sarajevo assassination, as well as Franz Ferdinand's blood-stained uniform, is on display at the Museum of Military History here in Vienna. And while Gavrilo Princip is considered an assassin in Austrian history books, he is to this day considered a hero, a revolutionary in Serbia, Bosnia and the Republika Srpska, who freed his people from the tyrants. Which shows it all depends on your point of view.
It does.
I honestly hope you all enjoyed this quick dive in a teeny tiny bit of Austrian history. My country has an interesting history, but it has its sad and horrible parts, and millions of people suffered and died, like everywhere, I guess. And I mean, all we can do is try to learn from the past and do our best not to repeat it.
Yeah.
I've been to Sarajevo a couple of times, and I'm actually going back there in the beginning of February. I will take a photo for you guys on the Latin Bridge.
Please do.
Okay, I think that's it. We've done it.
That's it.
We covered the 3 big horrible things that happened to the Habsburger.
No, I think these are interesting. And the nice thing about these episodes, the really historic episodes, is podcasts can sometimes be a little bit of a guilty pleasure. Like you might be listening to it while you should maybe be doing something else, but you're procrastinating. Now you don't have to feel bad because you learned a bunch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. My something good this week are 2 things that go with the theme of these 2 episodes. So first of all, I want to recommend you my absolute all-time favorite book in the world. It's called Radetzky March by Josef Roth. I checked. It's available on Amazon.com for Kindle, and I think it's like $4 or something like that. It is set in those last years of the Habsburg Empire. I think I read this book easily over 20 times, and it still makes me cry in the end. I recommend it to several people, and I think a couple of them actually did enjoy it. My husband is one of them. He read it, he liked it.
I'm gonna read it. Yeah.
If you want something more lighthearted, you can watch the Sissi trilogy with Romy Schneider that paints a highly inaccurate, very cheesy portrait of the Empress. I love those movies for what they are, and I heard they are available on YouTube with half-decent subtitles, actually.
I need to watch that. I still have the CC pill box that our mutual friend Erica brought me back from her trip to visit you. Oh gosh, it feels like forever ago now.
Yeah,
so
it was in April, I think.
Yeah. Ugh, I love it. So my something good this week is you. I am so grateful that you're my partner on this, and I need everyone to understand how much work you have done over the past several weeks, the past month, really. You've taken on the lion's share of the work, so I could spend time with my family when they were here for Christmas and New Year's, and then by the time we've recorded these two on the same day, and somewhere in between 1 and 2, I'll have hopefully had a successful surgery. Yeah, I'm so grateful that you're my partner in this. It's an absolute joy. Hopefully, when this posts, I should be several days post-op and researching on pain meds, so we'll see where that takes us, won't we? But yeah, I hope you all enjoyed learning about these royal murders as much as I did. My must-do list for when I finally get to visit you is just getting longer and longer, and I love it. At this rate, I think I'm going to be staying with you for like a month.
Well, that's my plan,
That's
actually.
it, yeah.
There's also a crime museum here in Vienna that we have to visit.
Oh, have to. Yeah, for sure.
Then there's the torture museum that we have to visit.
So many good things. Oh, see? I love it. I love it. I can't wait.
Let's wrap this up.
Yeah.
Hellions, listeners, please come say hello on Instagram, Twitter. Please, if you may, leave us a review. If you have an Apple device on iTunes, that really helps us a lot.
It really does. Come say hi in our private Facebook group. We would absolutely love to have you. Just search Fresh Hell Murder and you should find us.
We talked about both suicide and eating disorders over these 2 episodes, and you'll find resources pinned in our Facebook page if you should ever need them.
Of course, yeah. And as always, as Churchill once said, if you're going through hell,
keep going. Tschüss.
Bye.